It is 2 minutes to midnight on December 5, 2019. The air in Knightsbridge is biting cold, the kind that cuts through layers of wool and silence alike. Under the glow of elaborate Christmas lights, 20-year-old Muhammad Alami is walking down a quiet alleyway with his best friend. They have just finished dinner, laughing, perhaps discussing university or plans for the holidays, their breath misting in the freezing London night. On Muhammad's wrist sits a Patek Philippe watch, valued at roughly $37,000. It is a symbol of his family's success, a gift. But in exactly 8 seconds, it will become the catalyst for a tragedy that will end his life. However, to understand the true horror of this night, we must look away from the alleyway and rewind the clock 90 minutes. What sets this case apart from the thousands of other robberies in the capital is not the item stolen, nor the status of the victim, but the calculated behavior of the men who were hunting him. For an hour and a half, 2 predators stalked the wealthiest square mile in Britain, moving like ghosts through Notting Hill, Kensington, Hyde Park and Mayfair. These are streets lined with supercars, where a casual dinner can cost more than a month's rent, and where the pavements are a runway for extreme wealth. As they moved through the city, these men walked past dozens of potential targets. They brushed shoulders with individuals wearing Rolexes worth $50,000, Audemars Piguets retailing at $80,000, and Richard Mille's that cost upwards of $100,000. They looked at every single one of these shimmering wrists, assessed the value, and simply kept walking. They ignored millions of pounds in easily accessible luxury goods, until they spotted Muhammad and his friend turning into that specific, dimly lit alley. Only then did they decide to strike. When police later reconstructed the timeline using an intricate web of CCTV footage, they were baffled. They traced every step the perpetrators took, every hesitation, and every person they rejected. The footage revealed a terrifying anomaly that challenged everything detectives thought they knew about how these street gangs operate. Logic dictates that a thief hunting for high-value goods would target the most expensive item available. Yet, these men bypassed fortunes to pursue a young student with a watch that, while valuable, was far from the most expensive prize they had seen that night. What the detective discovered in that footage changed the entire understanding of street crime in London. These men were not hunting for the most expensive watch. They were hunting for a specific set of circumstances, a hidden signal that every single person watching this video possesses. It is a trait that marks you as a target, whether you are wearing a luxury timepiece or a simple digital watch. Once you understand what they were actually looking for, the terrifying statistics begin to make sense. It explains why 21 watches vanish from wrists in London every single day, why billionaires are too afraid to wear their collections in public, and why even the most robust police presence cannot prevent it. The events that unfolded in that alleyway were rapid and severe. But the decision to target Muhammad was made long before he stepped into the shadows. It was a choice based on a silent, invisible criteria that turned a 20-year-old student into prey. To understand how to protect yourself, you first have to understand the mind of the hunter, and the industrial-scale system they have built to strip you of your possessions before you even realize you are being watched. Let's examine the anatomy of this invisible threat. Meet Salam Belkacem, a 32-year-old Algerian national. To him, London isn't a home, it's a marketplace. He doesn't reside here but travels specifically to harvest luxury timepieces, flying in for short, lucrative stints that net him more than most legitimate careers earn in a decade. His operation is not random chaos. It is a finely tuned machine. Belkacem's team operates with military precision. They stake out the most exclusive dining establishments in Mayfair, particularly those with alfresco seating. On sunny days, when patrons relax with their sleeves rolled up, the targets are plentiful. Patek Philippe, Audemars Piguet, Richard Mille names that signal wealth are on full display. A spotter, blending seamlessly into the affluent crowd, identifies a target. They discreetly raise a phone, but they aren't capturing the scenery. They zoom in tight, bypassing the face entirely to get a crystal-clear image of the watch dial. That single image is the launch code. Belkacem is already waiting nearby on a moped, engine idling, helmet obscuring his features. When the photo lands on his screen, he knows the exact venue and the precise table. He accelerates. Within 30 seconds, The moped screeches to a halt at the patio's edge. His accomplice leaps off, seizes the victim's wrist with practiced force, and wrenches the watch free, often snapping the bracelet instantly. Before the diners at the next table can even register the commotion, the passenger is back on the bike, and they are gone. The entire extraction takes less than 8 seconds. Consider the case of Alexandre Boudoir. He was enjoying a spring afternoon lunch at a high-end Japanese restaurant in Mayfair, his arm resting casually on the table as he conversed with a friend. On his wrist was a Nautilus, a timepiece valued at roughly $65,000. A spotter captured the image. 3 minutes later, Boudoir was left injured and empty-handed. By the time the shock subsided, the moped had vanished into London's labyrinthine streets. Boudoir would never see that watch again. This is not the work of a single, isolated gang. It is an industry. Belkacem represents just one node in an international network. Some teams employ local riders armed with heavy blades. Others use female associates in Mayfair bars, who flirt with wealthy patrons solely to gauge the value of their accessories. But the methodology remains identical. Identify the asset, signal the extraction team, and strike with overwhelming speed. It operates on an industrial scale. 21 watches are taken every single day in the capital. The majority leave the UK within 6 hours, bound for Dubai, Singapore, or Hong Kong. Serial numbers are obliterated, and the items are sold to private collectors who ask no questions. The psychology appears straightforward: target wealth, maximize profit. It seems logical that the more expensive the watch, the higher the priority. But when detectives began to track the 2 men who targeted Muhammad Alami, they found a discrepancy that unraveled this entire theory. Muhammad was a student at King's College, diligent and focused. His father, a successful property developer in Oman, ensured Muhammad was comfortable, but he was never ostentatious. The watch on his wrist was simply a part of his daily life, as normal to him as a smartphone is to you. On that Thursday night, after a quiet Italian dinner, he and his friend walked past the iconic Harrods department store. They took a shortcut through a narrow alley between Basil Street and Sloane Street, 20 meters of shadow in one of the safest postcodes on Earth. 10 meters in, 2 figures emerged from the darkness behind them. Badir al-Nazi, 24, and Asabon Dilbaro, 23, launched their assault. Muhammad, young and fit, attempted to defend himself. But the confrontation escalated rapidly. In the ensuing struggle, a weapon was drawn. In 8 seconds of chaos, a single fatal wound was inflicted. As the attackers fled, Muhammad tried to run toward the lights of the department store, toward safety. He made it 30 meters before collapsing near the famous Christmas tree. Despite the frantic efforts of a passing doctor and paramedics, a life was extinguished over a material object. In the wake of that heartbreaking night, as a family mourned and a community reeled, detectives began the arduous task of piecing together the events that led to Muhammad's tragic passing. They had the end result: a young life cut short under the festive lights of Knightsbridge, but they needed to understand the prelude. In London, the surveillance network is omnipresent. Cameras capture nearly every movement on the public streets. This digital footprint allowed investigators to track Badir al-Nazi and Asabon Dilbaro, not just during the attack, but for the entire 90 minutes leading up to it. What they found on those tapes defied the logic of a simple robbery. The pair had arrived in the area at 10:47 p.m., stepping off the tube at Notting Hill Gate. From there, they began a methodical prowl through the city's most affluent neighborhoods. At 10:53 p.m., cameras on Kensington Church Street captured a man walking directly toward them. He was in his mid-50s, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, a heavy Rolex gleaming on his wrist. The footage is clear enough to identify the watch. Al-Nazi and Dilbaro were less than 5 feet away. They were close enough to reach out, close enough to strike and flee into the night. They looked at the watch. They looked at the man. And then, inexplicably, they just kept walking. 11 minutes later, near Kensington Palace, 3 men exited a restaurant. They were in high spirits, likely after a few drinks, laughing loudly. One of them wore a gold timepiece that caught the streetlights, flashy, obvious and expensive. The hunters slowed their pace, assessing the group. But again, they did not engage. They let the opportunity pass. At 11:18 p.m. near Hyde Park Corner, a couple was walking toward their parked car. As the man checked the time, his sleeve pulled back to reveal what appeared to be an Audemars Piguet, a watch that could easily fetch $80,000 on the black market. The predators were 20 feet behind them. They could have closed the distance in seconds. Yet, they held back. They watched the couple get into their vehicle and drive away, unharmed. This pattern continued for an hour and a half. Detectives identified at least 12 distinct moments where the pair were within striking distance of a target wearing a watch more valuable than Muhammad's. Each time, they made the conscious decision not to act. It wasn't until 11:52 p.m. when they saw Muhammad and his friend leaving a restaurant that their behavior changed. They followed the two young men into the isolation of the alleyway, and 8 seconds later, the trap was sprung. Why walk past a fortune in potential stolen goods only to target a student? The lead detective re-examined the footage, but this time, he stopped looking at the criminals. Instead, he studied the victims they had rejected. Slowly, the pattern emerged. The man with the Rolex walked with a purposeful stride, his head up, scanning his environment. The three men leaving the restaurant were a group. Attacking one meant fighting three. The couple at Hyde Park was moving toward a secure vehicle, and the woman's presence introduced a very oblivious scream, a witness, a complication. Every person they bypassed possessed a defense mechanism, however subtle. They were alert, they were in groups, or they were in open, public spaces. Then the detective looked at Muhammad and his friend. They were relaxed, their guard completely down after a meal. They were laughing, distracted by conversation, oblivious to the shadows behind them. And critically, they walked into a blind spot, a dark alley with no cameras and no witnesses. It was a chilling realization. These men weren't hunting for the most expensive watches, they were hunting for the most vulnerable people. The calculus was simple: a $50,000 watch on an alert target is a high-risk gamble. A $37,000 watch on a distracted, isolated target is a guarantee. The value the thieves were seeking wasn't measured in carats or complications. It was measured in the victim's lack of awareness. They wanted a target who wouldn't see them coming until it was too late. When Scotland Yard applied this theory of targeted vulnerability to other high-profile cases, the pattern became undeniable. It wasn't just happening to students in dark alleys. It was happening to elite athletes and trained fighters, individuals you would assume were immune to such victimization. Take the case of Amir Khan, a former world champion boxer and Olympic silver medalist. Khan is a man who has spent his life in the ring, facing down some of the most dangerous opponents on the planet. In April 2022, he was wearing a Franck Muller Vanguard, encrusted with 719 diamonds, and valued at $72,000. Earlier that day, he had posed for photos with fans on Oxford Street, the watch clearly visible. That evening, Khan and his wife Farial left a restaurant in East London. They were walking to their car. Crucially, Farial was trailing just a few steps behind him. It was a small gap, perhaps caused by checking a phone or a slower pace, but it created a moment of separation. In that split second, a Mercedes pulled up, and two men emerged. One rushed Khan, a weapon leveled directly at his face. The demand was instant: the watch. Khan, despite his training, handed it over immediately. Why? Because the attackers had waited for that specific geometry, the gap between him and his wife. The threat wasn't just to him, it was to her. He was isolated by distance, and the presence of a firearm neutralized his physical advantage. The gang had likely tracked him all day, waiting for the precise second when his ability to fight back was compromised by his concern for his partner. Then there is the harrowing experience of Mark Cavendish, the legendary Tour de France cyclist. In November 2021, he was at home in Essex with his wife and children. It was 2:30 a.m., and the house was silent. Cavendish was recovering from a severe crash during a race. He had broken ribs and a punctured lung. He was, by definition, physically compromised. A gang, faces obscured, smashed their way into the property. When Cavendish attempted to trigger a panic alarm, the intruders escalated the violence. One assailant targeted his injuries, while another threatened him with a blade in full view of his family. They escaped with 2 Richard Mille watches, totaling $700,000. Why attack an elite athlete known for his endurance and strength? Because at 2:30 a.m., injured and in bed, his physical prowess was irrelevant. The attackers didn't challenge Mark Cavendish, the cyclist. They attacked a recovering father in the middle of the night. They exploited his injury and the isolation of his home to guarantee compliance. This tragic calculus applies to everyone, regardless of fame. In July 2025, Blue Stevens, a 24-year-old father, stood outside a casino in Knightsbridge. It was late, he was with his partner, and he was likely tired. The setting felt secure. Expensive cars, doormen, the veneer of safety that wealth provides. He was relaxed, his guard down. In that moment of perceived safety, an attacker materialized from the street. Stevens was struck multiple times before he could react. The thief tore the gold Rolex from his wrist and fled, leaving a young father to lose his life on the pavement. Why Blue? Why then? Because he was relaxed. He felt safe, and that feeling of safety was his vulnerability. In every single one of these, Khan separated from his wife, Cavendish injured in bed, Stevens resting outside a casino, and Muhammad in that dark alley. The watch was secondary. The primary target was the moment when the victim was least capable of defending themselves. And this is where the reality becomes truly terrifying. If these gangs were simply hunting for the most expensive watches, the solution would be easy: wear a cheaper watch. Leave the Rolex in the safe. But they aren't hunting price tags. They are hunting you when you are weak. Despite the tireless efforts of law enforcement, the machinery of this crime wave continues to grind forward, often outpacing the very officers sworn to stop it. In January 2024, the Metropolitan Police announced the results of a major undercover initiative. For 9 months, officers had placed themselves in harm's way, posing as vulnerable targets in Westminster and Soho during the early hours. They wore luxury timepieces, stumbled as if intoxicated, and waited. When the thieves struck, backup teams descended. The operation was a tactical success: 31 arrests, 27 convictions, and a reported 40% reduction in theft within those specific zones. The commissioner held a press conference. The headlines promised safer streets. Yet, 18 months later, Blue Stevens lost his life outside that Knightsbridge casino. The operation had succeeded, but the underlying threat remained. Why? Because the police cannot be omnipresent. They cannot stand guard in every alley, outside every restaurant, or in every shadow of a parking garage. The scale of the problem is simply too vast. Between January 2022 and July 2025, over 5,000 watches, each valued at over $3,000, were reported stolen in London. Of those 5,000, police recovered just 59. That is a recovery rate of barely 1%. For every 85 watches taken, only one finds its way back to its owner. The reason for this abysmal statistic lies in the efficiency of the criminal network. These items do not stay in the UK. Before a victim has even finished giving their statement to the police, their watch is often already in the cargo hold of a flight bound for Dubai, Singapore, or Hong Kong. Serial numbers are professionally removed, and the pieces are sold to private collectors who ask no questions about provenance. The risk-reward ratio is heavily skewed in the criminal's favor, the chance of apprehension is low, sentences for theft are often short due to prison overcrowding, and the financial payout is immediate and substantial. This reality has forced even the most powerful individuals in the country to change their behavior. Sir Jim Ratcliffe, with a net worth of over $16 billion and ownership stakes in Manchester United, can afford the finest security money can buy. Yet he refuses to wear a watch in London. His decision stems from a harrowing incident captured on the CCTV cameras of his own office in Knightsbridge, directly opposite Harrods. One night, he watched the footage of 3 men surrounding a victim on the pavement outside his building. He watched the attack unfold, watched a man lose his life on his doorstep because he refused to surrender his Rolex, Ratcliffe realized a chilling truth. If such a tragedy can occur in one of the wealthiest square miles on Earth, under the gaze of high-definition cameras and private security, it can happen anywhere. Muhammad Alami walked into an alleyway and 8 seconds later was gone. Not because his watch was worth 37,000, but because in that moment, he was vulnerable. Amir Khan's wife was 3 steps behind him. Mark Cavendish was injured in his own bed. Blue Stevens was relaxed after a night out. So what is the defense? Some argue that we should stop wearing watches entirely. Others refuse to let criminals dictate their lives. But one thing is certain, if you choose to wear a watch, you must adopt the mindset of the hunted. Cover it with your sleeve. Avoid checking the time in unlit areas or empty car parks. Stay in groups. Keep your head up and your eyes scanning. Never let yourself become isolated. Never let yourself become distracted. Because the hunters are watching right now. They aren't looking at the brand on your wrist. They are waiting for the moment your guard drops. If this investigation has changed how you view the streets of London, please subscribe and turn on notifications. I have more stories like this that will challenge everything you think you know about crime in this country. In this city, your watch doesn't just tell time. It signals to the hunters exactly when you are vulnerable.